Welcome to the Outer Realm with Michelle DeRoche and Amelia Pisano. Airing live on the United Public Radio Network, 105.3 FM in New Orleans.
Good evening, everyone. Welcome to a pre-recorded segment here on the Outer Realm. We're broadcasting on United Public Radio Network and UFO Paranormal Radio Network 105.3 and 107.7 from beautiful New Orleans. The show is fully sponsored by the amazing people over at Folgers Coffee who have been a part of our journey since the very beginning. So thank you, Folgers. We appreciate you so much. Also, big thank you to Justin Snicker, aka Dr. Snick, the Sonic Surgeon, for his contribution of his voice and his music for our intro and our outro. He's an award-winning composer of Halloween, horror, sci-fi, and dark wave electronic music, which can be found on all the popular music platforms that you enjoy. Also, big thank you, Steve McGinnis, the artist behind our banners and logos here at the Outer Realm. So check him out on Facebook and Instagram. So tonight, you guys will have the honor of listening to Mark Olly, who is a repeat guest here, and he's just fascinating. Tons and tons of knowledge in this man's head. Just phenomenal. Lots of books out there. But tonight he's going to be talking about the Celts, the Druids, and the Green Man. And we're going back to ancient origins and such here. And he's going to be touching on two of his books. One is called Revealing the Green Man, and the other one is the Polychronicon, God, I never get that right, of Merlin, Joseph, and Arthur. Now, he's only going to be touching on one chapter of his new book because we actually are bringing him back on to do the full segment with, or about this new book. So the chat rooms will not be active tonight. I am sorry to say. I mean, you could probably get in there, but there won't be a soundboard. We are actually going to be airing this recording live tonight, and I will try to get myself into chat if I can. But otherwise, just hang tight and enjoy the ride. So without further ado, Mark Olly, one of my favorite people.
Hello. Hiya.
How are you?
Not so bad. Not so bad. Still here, still standing.
That's good news.
Aye.
I know. So what's it doing out in the UK? Are you guys still fighting with Mother Nature, which isn't really putting up a fight, or?
Well, you never know what's going to come from one day to another over here. So we got up this morning to sunshine, which we've had for 3 days. So now everybody's running around going, is it spring or is it summer? Because we only get like 2 or 3 weeks of summer a year.
Better than the alternative of snow.
Yeah, but we had that as well. That was last week.
Oh, that's nice. That's nice. Good old Mother Nature. You're not even trying.
It's crazy over here. You're never sure what's going to happen from one day to another. So
Well,
but yeah,
in England, it's very wet normally.
It is, but at the same time, that's why it's green. So I've flown all over the world and come in on aeroplanes, to different countries. And when you're coming into the UK, I mean, if anyone's ever done that, they'll know exactly what I mean. It's green as far as the eye can see.
Oh, it is. The rolling hills of England, I always say.
But we're British, so we always complain about the rain.
That's what we do. I was really excited to have you back on. It's always so much fun because we always end up doing this thing where we start over here and then somehow we end up over here and then back over here, but it just somehow all works out. So there's just so much to talk about. It's phenomenal. So tonight it's the ancient Celts, the Druids, the Green Man. Where the heck do you want to start? Because I'm ready.
Wow. Okay. Well, I suppose the place to start would be, and he Does it, reaching for his prop. Oh. There we go, revealing the green man. That's the one to go for.
Okay. I'm going to put this right up. So one
so
second.
if we kind of start with this is probably the best place to go.
Okay, right here. Here it comes.
Hey.
Bam! Right there.
Look at that. Oh, that's brilliant. I love this technology. It's amazing. So yeah, I had a friend of mine design that cover. I mean, normally I design my own covers, but there's a freelance artist guy over here called Anthony Potts, and he's brilliant. He's kind of a pagan. We call him Potty Pagan because he's just everything he does is pagan. He won't mind me telling you that. It's brilliant. So I commissioned him to do loads of illustrations for the book, and he just threw hundreds of illustrations at me, and that one stood out as the cover. So we put that one on the cover.
I love it.
It's I'll start by saying it's one of the few books that I've actually had a publisher ask me to write. I was doing it as a talk over a period of about maybe 10 or 15 years. So all I did was convert the PowerPoint into the book, but it's produced a kind of interesting book that's in nice, neat little bite-sized sections that are all really punchy, but they're all in chronological order. So as you sort of read through it, it becomes a developing story, and quite surprising. I mean, I knew the Green Man was old. I mean, he goes all the way back into the BC period, but I didn't realize how old, because when I started doing the research, it pushed me back to ancient Babylon. There's this thing in the in one of the what's it in now? One of the big quests that they have. One of the stories they have out there, and it's all about them going into this forest, and they're confronted by this god called Humbaba. And Humbaba basically is the god of the green. You know, it's the life energy, the power in the forest. And what these guys are doing is they're going in there with bronze axes to clear the forest for the very first time, because you're about 7,500 BC. So they're just beginning. Well, they're just beginning to realize they can grow things in fields. You know, they don't have to go and forage for food. But the very first thing they do, and this kind of sets the scene for the whole book, is to go into the woods, and they realize that by taking control, by dominating, by, you know, changing that environment, they are coming face to face with this almighty force that's been there for, you know, tens of thousands of years. And that really is the origin of of the Green Man, right at the beginning.
This is not myth. He's a real being, I always go back to like tree ant, because I'm just a Tolkien fan, but like an elemental maybe type of spirit, or is it?
Yeah, it's the Epic of Gilgamesh. I remembered what the book was, and it's in there. And what they're doing there is they're having a sort of a polar change, if you like, in the way that the society runs. Because without farming, without the ability to grow crops and stuff, you can't have cities. You can't concentrate people together into large quantities. So it's a complete change from what we as archaeologists know as the sort of hunter-gatherers. So you've got sort of the end of the Ice Age running right up to, you know, the early archaeology, probably 10,000 BC, right up to that period. They're always hunter-gatherers. And then all of a sudden, wow, there's this massive change. And you can see it being written into the Epic of Gilgamesh, and it starts with this character called Humbaba. And again, you're probably not far off with Ents, because I mean, America, you've got this, so we're quite jealous over here. You've got woods, forests,
where
people have never set foot. You know, you've got places where human beings have not been. So if anybody, I mean, anybody out there knows what it's like to go into a sort of a wooded wilderness where it's all woods, you know, where you literally have to fight your way in and fight your way back out again. You get this idea of just how powerful and creepy and spiritual and strange and bizarre woodland is. Most people don't really get that, because we've got, you know, trees going down streets and trees growing in our back gardens and things like that. But get enough trees together and you've got a really strange place, a dark, you know, brooding sort of place. So you can see why, you know, these guys are coming in from, you know, fairly, you know, open grassland and desert and places like that. And they're going into the woods and it's dark, you know, it's different. Noise acts differently. Everything in there is
And
bizarre.
they're just peeving all the elementals off because,
well,
we don't take care of things on average.
Yeah, and I mean, you'll have experienced this yourself. You go into a woods, it doesn't really matter what the woods is. If you're completely alone, sooner or later, you feel like you're being watched.
Oh, I have been to many forests like that. The Haunted Forest of Romania was this exceptional experience.
Well, yeah, I'd say no more. You don't need to know any more then, because there is something there. There's something there watching you, and you know there is. It's beyond the pale. It's beyond that dark, brooding.
Right.
You can't see very far because you're in a woods, and it's very often it's misty or it's foggy,
right.
Or whatever. And it's that, that feeling you've got that something's watching you. That is the Green Man, and the Green Man's been there, as long as we've been there. Oh, the other thing as well, I was going to say, the other thing that's worth saying is it's always a bloke. It's only in the last sort of 50 to 70 years, only since the 1960s and 70s, and this rising up of the idea of equality, that we've got, green women, green ladies.
Well, apparently that's really rare, but it's been a thing, but just a rare thing.
It is, and it's very, very recent. Yeah, it's a very, very recent thing.
Right.
So it's always a bloke. I was going to say, just to keep it even. It's
always keep it even. Just
it's always a bloke because they had their own mysteries for ladies.
Right.
In a sense, if you went into the woodland, there was a good there's a good chance you weren't going to survive. You were going to get eaten, or you were going to die, or a tree would fall on you, or you'd never get out.
Like malevolent.
Yeah. Well, there was a darker side to that. There's a darker side to the Green Man as well. But women, the goddess, which is the other side of the coin, if you like, that's the portal, that's the doorway through which life comes.
Of course.
So they had two completely different, opposite ideas of male and female. And you can see that in prehistory. You can see it in the archaeology. I mean, the book is essentially an archaeological book, but, it opens up a whole new vista for folks, I'm sure.
I love it because, I know I can tell you I've got, just pieces of furniture that have come from overseas that are very elaborate, very old, like going back, 200-300 years old. And there's lots of Green Man in there. I mean, different pagan deities of sort. And I can't tell you how much of the Green Man I have. And that's what sort of introduced me to him, was just all of this amazing, just architecture first off, because I love architecture. Wherever I travel, I have to be touching everything. I have to see all the architecture stuff. And of course, seeing it in furniture, I'm just like, I must have this. It's just calling to me. And I met so much of it. People was like, what is your fascination? I don't know. Maybe I was a fairy or something at one point. I don't know.
Over the last 200 or 300 years, people have really pushed hard into the Green Man to find out what he's all about. So you've got Jack in the Green. You've got all of a sudden the Robin Hood thing becomes, Jack in the Forest. It becomes all that. The Victorians had a big thing with green men, that appeared in parades that go into decoration and that. But the version you're looking at goes back to medieval times, and the book covers this because, of course, the link is the foresters. If you're dealing with the forest, you're still dealing with this green deity. And wherever you had a church or a building or a piece of furniture or anything else that related to the Foresters Guild, their symbol is the face of the Green Man, the green face in the leaves.
And that's fascinating to me because the church being the church, which basically, I'm going to say it.
Go on.
They bastardized a lot of the pagan, the pagan deities. Just, like a lot of the pagan deities ended up becoming, the Christian demonics.
Well, they said that they stole a lot of it, but it's more to say, as you say, they kind of reappropriated it. Because
you're so much kinder than me. I just get so
it has the same meaning.
I
think it was Pope
I'm Catholic.
Gregory.
I could say it.
Well, yeah, it was
Pope Catholic.
Gregory in 640 AD said, if it's any good, just adopt it. Basically, if you're a Christian evangelist, don't be throwing people out of the sacred sites. Just reappropriate them. So it's it's been going on for well over 1,000 years, 1,500 years. But the Green Man was the symbol of life and resurrection and spring and things coming back after what was essentially the death of winter.
Yes,
so
exactly.
when you look at the Christian mythology, you think, hang on a minute, that says we can come back from the dead. Jesus came back from the dead. God can come back from the dead. So when you look at that, it's kind of, there's a massive crossover between.
Yeah, they've incorporated all the interesting parts of every place they've amalgamated with. Yes.
Early Christianity and Druidry. It's said that the two actually merged. The two came together more than likely in this country, in Britain, because in the post-Roman period, you had the early Christians running around sort of trying to do all the evangelism stuff and that, but not having a sort of formal pattern. They didn't really know how the religion was going to go. And from an Arthurian point of view, the oldest church in the world is Joseph of Arimathea, which is here in Britain. That's about 54 AD. So that's older than the Roman Catholic Church by 10 years. Yeah, it's great, actually. If you went and knocked on the Pope's door, if you went and knocked on there and you went, hello, what's the oldest church in the world? He would tell you it was the British Celtic Church, because we've got Joseph of Arimathea founding it in 54, and it's Saints Peter and Paul in Rome after 60. It's probably about 62 AD or 64 AD.
That's amazing.
We're 10 years older. We've always been recognized as the oldest church in the world. And that's why the Druids, because this was the world capital, Britain was the UK world capital for Druids for 3,000 years, possibly. So what the Druids were doing over here, the similarities between them and the Christians resulted in this order called the Culdees, which are early Celtic holy men that go round in threes like the Druids used to do, wearing these long woolen cloaks and carrying swords for defense and all that, but essentially preaching a British kind of Christianity, which has all these crossovers. It's amazing. I mean, if you go in the average church and you look at the church and you think, hang on a minute, columns, going up into the roof.
I'm a nut job for Gothic arches. I go stupid with it. It's got to be a pathlight thing.
It's a forest glade, isn't it? You're in a forest glade. You look at the way it's orientated, north, south, east, west. The whole orientation and everything is all the same as you'd find in stone circles.
Yes.
And they're plonked on top of hills or wells or, other older sacred sites. And the list just goes on and on. But the big kicker, the real kicker, is you don't find any of that, none of those instructions in the Bible. They're not there. So they've got to have come from somewhere. And it's that early Christianity that's creeping in from 2,000 years ago. So I noticed you changed your set a bit as well. You've got some nice carved wooden furniture.
I've moved.
I'm Gothic.
I'm still in the process of just trying to keep my space the way I like it. But
you've lost the suit of armor, which is a shame. But
it's always been there.
You've got chainmail on one side. Yeah.
Well, I mean, he's always been there. You just haven't. You saw more of him in the other place. It's really heavy.
Oh yeah, I've got a suit of that I wear sometimes for reenactment.
Right.
So
it just weighs you down as you get older. It's like,
it's not so bad when it's on because
it
spreads out, so it's not so bad in weight wise. But
yes,
picking it up's a bit of a nuisance.
It's always fun to move, I can assure you. But but what I find interesting, even going back, is Britain has a huge Roman population, like in ancient times. I can't get over the amount of things that you guys find that is Roman. It's that's buried, roads, everything.
Yeah, it's down to Julius Caesar that really started that in about 55, 54 BC. He decided he wanted to come over here and conquer it. So, I mean, he conquered all of France. He conquered all of, everything he could get his hands on, basically. Right. And he hit the English Channel, crossed over, and he just met with the biggest resistance you could possibly imagine. But at that point, I mean, he basically came, he saw, and he went home again. He just got battered and kicked out. They didn't come back for another 100 years. But that's beside the point, because at that point, he'd brought Roman to Britain. He brought the Roman stuff over here. And some of us guys over here were thinking, hey, do you know what? It's not so bad. Heated underfloor, baths and, all this kind of civilized stuff. Yeah, we could have a bit of this, bit of the old hypercourse and a bit of, tesserae for tile floors and all this, So they kind of began to adopt the Roman thing even before we had a Roman invasion, because the Roman invasion doesn't begin until after 40 AD. So it's quite a bit later on.
Right.
And once they got here, the Romans really, got stuck in. So what you see is England. So kind of forget Wales, Ireland and Scotland, but the middle bit that you see labelled as England and a bit of Cornwall. Most of that was kind of pieced together by Romans. And there's just tons of it, absolutely tons of it. We're falling over Roman stuff here.
I know. It's just, go out in your garden. Wait, it's part of a Roman tile on the floor.
That does happen. That actually does happen. I've been to one person's house where you're treading on Roman pottery because it's scattered in the garden. And
see, to me, that is amazing. I would just love it. I stumbled onto the series on the BBC. It's an old series, and it was called what is it? The Time Crew? Is it Time Crew?
Time Team.
Time Team. I freaking can't stop watching that thing.
I'm not surprised.
I love it.
That was one of the biggest TV series we ever had. Time Team. It ran for years. It ran for about 16 years, I think, in all. So yeah,
I stopped at season 9 or 10. I'm like, what? No.
Well, I've got to say they're online now, so you can actually go and watch stuff on the internet as well if you can find them. Yeah, they're out there online.
New stuff.
Yeah, they're doing new stuff as well.
Oh boy, I know somebody in this house will be real happy besides me.
This year. Yeah, 2 new digs this year.
Oh wow, I love that. I love that because I just love the history. I love all of it. So for me, to stumble on this, I watch a lot on the BBC. So I stumble onto it and was like, what is this? So I couldn't stop watching it.
That's basically what I did as a day job for 12 years. I did that kind of thing, archaeology. I ran my own archaeology unit, and then I got my own TV project, but it was on ITV, not BBC.
Right.
And I don't think you'll find Lost Treasures out there because they've not put much of it online. But just for the folks that are watching, go and Google Lost Treasures, see what comes up. It'll be me in a big black Gothic coat with a huge black Gothic hat looking like.
Oh, very nice.
So yeah, you'll like the image for that one. Yeah.
Perfect. Perfect. I love it. So I guess in doing a lot of archaeological work, you must have come across. Have you come across really ancient or really old green man buried?
Well, funnily enough, yes. In the book, Revealing the Green Man, there's a couple of photographs that you won't see anywhere else, especially these 2 early Norman green men. They look, you can tell because they look dirty. They look like they've been dug up. And the reason for that is they have been dug up. They were excavated on a local Norman site adjacent to a Norman castle. So they're about 1,000 years old. But over here, there aren't many green men from that period. So the 2 photographs that are in the book are particularly rare. They don't really take off. Green men don't take off till Gothic. And Gothic is kind of after the Crusades. So you're looking at 1100, 1200, 1300. But to go all the way back to 1000, 1066 and all that, the early Norman invasion, you don't get many from that sort of 50-year period from 1050 to 1100. But 2 new ones are in the book. From Alvanley, which is a village up here. So we do find
that's really cool. I love that. I love that. I know. I love it. I love it in my decor. It's just like pretty much everywhere.
It's that moment, when you're digging away, and all of a sudden you think, "Hang on a minute, there's a face. There's a face in this hole, and it's staring back at me." And then you start to clear around it, and then the penny drops that you're probably the first person to set eyes on that in hundreds of years. And it's just amazing. It's amazing. It's that moment. In archaeology, I think the chase is better than the catch. Once you've got it, you have to hand that over to somebody else. Then you move on to the next bit. So I'm a bit of a thrill seeker when it comes to the chase.
Oh yeah, no doubt. No kidding. So why don't we branch? You also cover a chapter based on the Green Man in your new book as well. Let me get the new book.
I might be able to beat you to it because here it comes.
You probably can't, but I'm going to do it anyway because I can.
Hey, go on then. Yeah, definitely.
This is like something I've just decided to start doing.
Okay, well this only, I'll do the advert while you're doing it because this only came out. Literally only came out in February, so it's literally hot off the press. The one I've just shown you is hardback as well. The hardback book's amazing. This is just, look how thick that is. That is just beautiful. That is so sexy. I just love it. It's great.
It is.
White clean cover and all that. Bags of space on the pages for making notes. Yes. Brilliant. Absolutely brilliant it is. So it's one of the best books I think I've ever seen. It's brilliant on Arthur.
And it's really like a lot of years in the making.
It took 45 years to get it from start
lots of
to
years.
publisher. I can tell you, it started off as a series of notes because I was doing a movie for a cine society in 1977 called King Arthur Seasons of the Mind. So I did all the research for it. So it started off as notes. Then I put all the notes together. Then the notes ended up on a BBC computer. Then I graduated onto an Amstrad. Then it saw off 2 Amstrad computers. Then it went on to a Microsoft system. I think it was Windows 3.0. And then it's actually seen off 7 versions of Windows and Windows computers till eventually it ended up on my super duper all singing all dancing laptop. Then I sent it to the publisher, Flying Disc Press, Philip Mantle. He then turned it into a PDF, so it's gone again, and then it ended up going over to Amazon in a different format. So it can be published. So do you know, it's really had a journey. It's had a long journey.
It has, and
everything you ever wanted to know about Merlin, Joseph of Arimathea, and King Arthur.
Well, so we've got a whole show like dedicated to this.
Yeah, later
at this rate, we might be changing some schedules to get this thing going.
Well, I seriously didn't expect it to be out till later in the year. Philip's done a brilliant job of bringing it out.
Oh, really, he always does. He really just pops books out like this.
Oh, he's amazing. We're already on to the next one. I mean, I won't confuse you by telling you what the next one is, but that's coming out later in the year, much later. But we're already on to the next one.
Well, you can confuse us at the end of the show and just put it out there so we know.
Okay. He's so enthusiastic when he gets going. This book, as you say, this book is enormous. So the bit that kind of overlaps with the Green Man, obviously, is the Merlin bit, because the link between the two is the Druids. So if you kind of read the book on the Green Man, bearing that in mind, that tells you how we finish up with the Druids. And then if you pick that story up at the Merlin section, then that gives you literally all the references from the Romans and all these different people, wherever they met the Druids, because the Druids didn't really write anything down, so we're relying on observers. All those references go into the Merlin section, because Merlin, if you like, is the end of the Druids. You know, he is the last of that type of Druid.
So again, is he, like many people look at the whole Arthurian thing, is it a man or a myth?
Okay, let's put that one to rest. I started off with Arthur many years ago, and I'm thinking, yes, it's got to be all mythology. It's got to be all nonsense. Even then, as a kind of a teenager going into my early 20s, even then I knew that a lot of what we saw in King Arthur was just rubbish. It was impossible because it doesn't match up. The stuff we have in the medieval period doesn't match the post-Roman era. So I'm thinking, it's got to be made up and all that. But the more I got into it, the more I realized that behind all of that, there are actually real characters. And the real characters, to some extent, are better. They're more relevant. They're more 21st century. They're more kick-ass than the ones you see in the fiction. They're really. I mean, let me just read you a bit.
Yeah, please.
Okay, because this really sums it up.
It's almost like show and tell.
Yeah, it is, isn't it? Yeah, here we go. It says here. It says Merlin becomes one of an ancient line of Pythagorean scholars and political visionaries. Joseph of Arimathea, a religious dissident fleeing persecution and death to far-off foreign shores, and Arthur, a hardened womanizing battle leader who loses his entire family and culture to war and eventually natural disaster. So that's who they really were. That's not the fiction. That's the real characters. There's more than one Merlin as well. I've got to say this early on. Merlin is a title. So certainly in the Welsh part of the British Isles at the end of the Roman era, you've got a character known as the Merlin. So you've got Merlin Taliesin, you've got Merlin Ambrosius, you've got Merlin Le Logan. He's the old guy that's around when Arthur's there. He lives to a colossal age. Then you've got Merlin Willett, who's Merlin the Mad. He sees Arthur defeated and everything going wrong. Then after him is Merlin Tortugan. And by the time you get to his successor, who's not referred to really as a Merlin, he's referred to as a poet or a bard, you've covered in that space, you've covered about 200 years. So you know, and I'm not the first person to find out that there's more than one of them. There was a Welsh guy studying Welsh material back in the 1500s, so 500 years ago. He noticed that in Arthur's lifetime there were two. You know, there's one Merlin in the first part of his life, and then a different Merlin in the second half of his life. So that was realized, you know, even 500 years ago. They knew that there was more than one of them.
Which is fascinating.
Not many people know that, you know.
No, but they don't really. I think people are just so fixated on the fact of the fairy tale. And I mean, people would be upset with me, you know, with the fairy tale part, but it's like any deep-rooted story, you know, that has been taken and put into a tale of love, and, you know, like Arthur and Guinevere and Sir Lancelot in the background, just in that third wheel. You know, people just fall into that. And Merlin the magician, I think, you know, that's just what is engraved into us. Like the story of Robin Hood, we see the commercial version of everything.
I've done a book about him as well, but that's a different interview. If you want to dash out and buy that one as well, there's bits about the Green Man and Foresters in that, but that's a different interview. Right. Basically, the trick with Arthur is that the medieval stories, which are the ones you've just quoted, they enshrine what's going on in medieval times. So you've got medieval chivalry. Lancelot is a medieval character. They're wearing medieval armor. They're fighting in medieval ways. You know, the whole courtly love thing and everything. That's the Arthur most people know. Right. But behind that, the real Arthur survives, because even though you could make stories up, so Geoffrey of Monmouth doing his History of the Kings of Britain in the 1100s, even though you can make stories up, there still has to be an element of truth behind it. People at that point in history still needed to clearly recognize the original material. So you do find that Arthur ends up with Guinevere, but that's his third wife, and he does that for political reasons, because she's Pictish, and he basically needs the support of the Pictish warriors to be able to defeat the Saxons. So that bit of the story's true, but not the way you find it in the medieval legends.
No.
Yes, she does run off with somebody else, but it's not Lancelot, it's actually Mordred. But that gets confusing, because everyone's like, hang on a minute, isn't Mordred Arthur's son? He is, but by the first wife. So you've got to go back to the original story to get that gritty truth, you know. She ends up running off with Mordred because she thinks Arthur's dead, because he's gone on to fight on the continent. And then when he inconveniently turns up, she has to do a runner, and he goes and fights Mordred. And that's how we get the Battle of Camlan, where Mordred and Arthur eventually both get killed as a result. So you can see that there is a pattern, if you like, of truth running behind it all. And that's what the Polychronicon is. It's a chronological order of stories that basically run like a diary. And it's a diary of Merlin's life, Joseph's life, and then Arthur's life, then what happens afterwards. And then right at the very end, we have a look at the literature side of it. So it's an interesting, different type of book. It's dead easy to read, honestly. It really is easy. It's not difficult. It's not confusing. It's all written in plain English.
So who was Arthur really? Was he a Roman soldier, or was he British? Are there clues of you know, his existence?
Okay, there is. If you go back to his great-great-great-grandfather, who's Constantine II, he's Spanish.
Spanish, no less.
So somewhere in Arthur's DNA is Spanish, Romano-Spanish DNA.
Right.
Jump back to Arthur. His dad, Uther Pendragon, is British. He's a Welsh Briton. But his mum comes from northern France and is actually more that sort of ilk of the woods. So in physical reality, he's got this element of Spanish in him, but he's also French. He's half French. Well, that makes sense. That's why you find so much Arthurian material in northern France. That's why all the Normans have such an amazing interest in him, because that's where his mum comes from. But then you've also got this thing where he comes from the Clyde Peninsula, which is in North Wales. That's where the rest of his family is. And that gets really interesting, because there's all kinds of bloodlines that are crept into the Clyde Peninsula. You've got Irish, you've got Scottish, you've got Pictish, you've even got Anglo-Saxon. So there's a lot of elements to him The best you can say is that he's Roman, because the Romans are a mixed race. You know, they come from everywhere.
Right.
So you can't just point at him and go, well, he's British, or, you know, he's Welsh. You know, he's multinational. He's exactly like the rest of us alive today. You know,
mine's 57. Yes,
he is. Yeah,
yeah.
I mean, he would have spoken proper Roman. You know, he wouldn't have had all the other language that we're using now, because we've got German, Saxon, goodness knows what else, French, all mixed in with our language. He would have spoken pure Latin. He'd have spoken like your average Roman. And he was probably quite well built. I mean, I can go into some detail here. Some people think that he had a beard for most of his life. He was a really solid bloke, didn't take any nonsense. He was a bit of a woman's man, because he had, you know, first Gwyer and then another wife from Ruthin, and then eventually he has Guinevere. He ends up with 7 sons and quite a few daughters, but none of the sons outlive him. They're all dead before he is. All under different circumstances. Two of them rebel against him, and he kills both of them. And out of the remaining 5, obviously Mordred's one of them. He dies at Camlan. Another one dies on a battlefield in a big scuffle. And we're left to assume that the others die under similar circumstances. So he has to go to his cousin when he dies. He has to go to his cousin for someone to take his place. So when he's dying, he appoints Custennin, who is the son of Constantine, a different Constantine, and that young lad disappears. You never find out anything about him. So Arthur never really gets succeeded either. His lands eventually get taken over. So he's
which brings me to the next question with the lands. Camelot. Was it, and where is it?
I can tell you exactly where it is.
Okay, good.
You ready for this? It's Chester. It's Chester, the biggest Roman fortress ever built, which is about 20 minutes drive from here. It's 11 acres bigger than any other Roman fort. It's got the biggest amphitheatre in Britain, where the first Christians were martyred. It was surrounded by walls, giant walls that were whitewashed, so it was called the White City of God, hence Camelot. It's got the biggest military building complex in Britain, including the biggest military headquarters. The bathhouse was converted into a palace at the time of Arthur. So he had this socking great big palace with loads of water in it that he could go and bathe in. And the real kicker, we had this thing called the elliptical building, which is a bit like the Pantheon in Rome. And it was known in Anglo-Saxon as Tabliarum Rotundus, or Tablius Rotundus, which means the round floor. And it was still standing. All of that was still standing when Arthur was here. And his home territory is the bit of land in Wales next door to Chester. So if you get into the book, all of a sudden, you know, wham, all the archaeology's there, all the history's there, all the military bits are there, everything's decoded. It makes perfect sense. You know, so there was a Camelot. Of course there was a Camelot. And you can go and stand in it. It's still
people
there.
will tell you that it's myth, you know. I mean, what's left? I mean, what was found? Was anything found there to validate that this is the mighty Camelot?
Okay, I can give you the best. I'll give you the best reference of the lot.
I like it.
I'll tell you a story I don't tell very often, because when I was doing Lost Treasures, which was the regional history history program for ITV, excuse me, I had to interview. I can't give his name out, otherwise he'd kill me. But the head archaeologist, the chief archaeologist for Chester. Now, he is the guy who has written all of the academic papers and the archaeological publications for 36 years of archaeology in Chester. So he actually excavated the elliptical building. He was responsible for digging it up. And I sat with him for days and days and days. And he got me on the last day, and he just said to me, he said, look, he said, if you ever do a documentary, he said, on King Arthur, you must come and find me. He said, because I know for a fact that Chester is Camelot. Now, this is coming from a internationally renowned professional, you know, university professor level, you know, doesn't want the general public to know at this point because he'll lose his career. But all of the information he gave to me, which is archaeologically correct, is in that book. Because he's allowed me, he's given me permission to, his first name's David, I'll go that far. So David, if you're out there listening, I'm keeping your secrets safe, except they're all in the book because he gave me permission to put them in the book.
Right.
So I literally challenge anybody anywhere in the world, doesn't matter who you are. You can be the biggest archaeologist anywhere on the planet, you name it, anywhere, any country, anywhere. I challenge you to try and overturn the archaeological evidence, because trust me, it's overwhelming.
Can anything be viewed in any museums in that area?
Yes. Most of the walls are still there. All of the stuff I reference is available in the Grosvenor Museum in Chester, so you can go and see that. Sadly, the reason he got to excavate the elliptical building is that in the 1970s they destroyed it to build the bus station, so it's gone. The only thing that's there is a big hole, but they did manage to recover quite a few of the bits of it. So there are some of the tiles from the floor, the big tiles, they've still got them. They've still got a water pipe that was underneath the building that actually has a date on it, which is brilliant. It's one of the few dates we've got for buildings in the UK. And all the links that building has, you know, it could link all the way back to the first church that Joseph of Arimathea built, you know, in North Wales in about 54 to 56 AD. The shape of it, the design of it, it was originally planned by Vespasian in the 70s, which is 70s AD. Vespasian was the Roman general, if you like, the Roman emperor who conquered Jerusalem. So that really pops your head. It's like 1 minute he's over there with his son Trajan, you know, doing what he's doing, conquering Jerusalem and you know, putting down the Jews and burning the temple.
He's in the UK.
And next minute he's over here. He's here in Chester, building Chester. So you think this is a bloke that knows a huge amount about religious buildings, you know. And needless to say, the legends about that find their way into the book. And I think I'm the first person to do that. I don't think anyone's, because it's chronological.
You've just bridged everything.
Yeah, because it's in order. You can string all this together. You can see how they're thinking. You know, you think, well, hang on a minute. If the Romans were doing this then it makes sense they would know how to do that further on. You know, and then you think, well, hang on a minute. That's the time when Arthur was alive.
Yes.
I mean, one of the real kickers, one of the big kickers is you've got William the Conqueror. He comes over here, 1066, Battle of Hastings. Yeah, you know, dead famous, comes over, does what he does, beats the Saxons and all that. But he decides he's going to come up here and attack Chester because Chester's holding out, you know, for the Saxons at this point. So he comes up here in 1072 and he attacks Chester. He marches into the city of Chester in 1072, and guess what? All the buildings are still standing. So you've now got William the Conqueror in Camelot looking at all the buildings. And all of a sudden you think, okay, no wonder the Normans had an interest in King Arthur, because they know exactly where all the stuff is.
They do.
You know, through the next 100 years, they had it all right there on the doorstep. It makes that really valuable link. But then also, this is the reverse of this, just to prove the point. You go and have a look at the Bayeux Tapestry, which is 1086, and it's, you know, singing the praises of the Battle of Hastings and this, that, and the other. And lo and behold, when he's finished the Battle of Hastings, he's having a big, you know, feast with all the people that, you know, he's has won, all his warriors and all that, and he's sat at a round table on the Bayeux Tapestry. And when you start joining the dots, you think, I wonder where he got that idea from.
Right. See, this is fascinating to me because there's so much literature that says William the Conqueror, who's part of, like, you know, my line, never made it to England. They always said he was the only French king to ever sit on the throne that he never stepped foot in, and yet built the Tower of London and, you know, these amazing places.
I'm not sure about all the places he built, but he definitely got here. I mean, what we have over here is we have the Anglo-Saxons, and they tend to write an awful lot of stuff down about people they don't like. And trust me, they really, really didn't like William the Conqueror. So there's a shed load of stuff about
people didn't like William the Conqueror. Well, let's face it. I mean, his family made it up to Scotland, and I know I have other family members who were part of his private knights. And they're on some monument up there.
How are you tied into him then? I'm fascinated. Go on.
Oh, it's all from my grandmother's side. And it's because, well, I guess it goes into the Sinclairs because my grandmother's from Portugal, and they had, I guess, Columbus married into a very well-to-do family there of grandmasters, owned all the shipping and married into the Sinclair. It's a very strange line. And on my grandfather's side, who in this life married to my grandmother, it was his family. He was part of the private guard, the private knights. And his name's on some monument up in the UK somewhere. I have family in the UK. I have like a friend and family all over the dang world. Yes.
Oh, you need to come over here and have a holiday. You need to come and visit us.
I sure do. I've been a couple times, and I'm just like, I'm never there long enough. And everybody's like, you need to come and stay for a while.
No, 2 or 3 weeks at least, just to get around things.
Yeah, I mean, you to all these places though.
I mean, I'll kind of pop your head a bit because I'm related to Scotland as well.
Yes.
I'm related to the Clan Ranald of the Western Isles, so I've got connections there.
Nice.
But the real one that will really pop your head is if you look at William the Conqueror's cousin, which is Bishop Odo, who he ends up putting in charge of the abbey down wherever, Hastings or whatever, Battle Abbey. Odo is in the family tree. It's in the family line that eventually produces Robin Hood.
I love it. I love it. There's such a mix in there. I've got like ancestry Norse. I've got, I would, right? If we have a different relation there. And then we've got Scotland, we've got Ireland, we've got England.
Well, like I said, it's
Portugal.
You're in good company. I mean, I'm not saying quite as diverse as that, but certainly internationally, Arthur was an international character. He was equally as diverse, in his day, as you and I are in ours. I have to say, most of my DNA, the majority of it, is Central European Celt. So I've basically got the same DNA as Otzi the Iceman, and believe it or not, Akhenaten and his dynasty. I've got about 65-70% in common with Akhenaten and Tutankhamun and all them lot.
I'm down there too, in like that part of Africa. I have it all. I just have to sit down and like look it up. I'm just like, there's too much. I'm a big Heinz 57 everywhere. But it's interesting because the way it all lines up. But I mean, we do have this, DNA imprinting. We do have this from our ancestors and such. So the things that we have of interest and the things that we really thrive in, would come, I think, from them. Hence, just walk through my house, you'd be like, is this a museum? I don't let anybody sit anywhere.
Brings us nicely back on topic in a sense, because I'm not a massive believer in reincarnation. I don't think everybody everywhere comes back, but I am a huge believer, a massive believer in race memory. I think there's a huge element of stuff going on in our DNA that we still don't know about. I mean, when you consider how long a DNA strand is, there's so much stuff in there, and we are definitely, undeniably, the sum total of everything that's gone before us. That's what we are. So my interest in things like King Arthur and Robin Hood and the Green Man, and ultimately all that side of things, that has got to have something to do with what's in me. As they say over here, it's in me to do it.
It's imprinting, it's memory.
It is, exactly, and you clearly have the same thing. We are living examples of that. So who knows that there might not have been some connection there to Romans, to Druids, to the people of the past.
Absolutely.
The Druids, I think the Druids themselves had a very similar view. They realised that every now and again somebody seemed to come back, almost like a repeat of somebody that had been in the past. But by the same token, there were an awful lot of people kicking around that were very similar to their ancestors that were known. So the Druids must have looked at that.
Druids, it was all verbal. So this was instilled into.
Yeah, well, they must have looked at what they were looking at. They were like, there's got to be a life before we get here. There's got to be a life after we've gone. And that has got to impact on what we're seeing now. And that's the Pythagorean twist, which I explore quite a bit in The Green Man, because and as well in the Arthur the Merlin thing, because the Romans state that basically the Druids were Pythagoreans. Pythagoras was alive in about 530 odd BC. So they picked up on his teaching. But that's one of the few clues, because we've only got very, very few clues as to how the Druids thought. And the Pythagoreans had that view. We come from somewhere, we go to somewhere, and the Celts, they were forever sending people on to the next world. They had that. A lot of the bog bodies, a lot of the Celtic bog sacrifices, they are people who have been sent on to the next world. In fact, there's a big clue in that. That's what got me onto the Green Man, coming back on topic. Over here, we have Lindo Man, who is a bog body that was deposited over here in Cheshire. And the British Museum examined him. And I got the report back for Lindo Man in the 1990s, 1994 or whatever. And when I was reading through this, I thought, hang on a minute, did I understand what I just read there? And it said, we were looking, basically, the British Museum, to summarise, they were looking for tattoos, because there's Otzi the Iceman, he's covered in tattoos. So they thought, okay, we'll see if we've got any on Lindo Man. So they get Lindo Man, they start looking, they analyse his skin, and they find that when he was dropped into the bog as a human sacrifice, he was painted all over with an almost lethal dose of copper. So basically, they'd gone to the nearby copper mine, which is Olly Edge. They'd ground all this copper powder up. They'd painted Lindo Man. And then, are you ready for this? When it oxidized and he turned green, they sacrificed him and dropped him into the black waters. And I had this vision. I'm thinking, you've got sort of leaves swirling around a green face as it disappears into the earth, as it vanishes back into the black water. And that's what inspired the book, because I thought that makes Lindo Man the first archaeologically provable green man. That's what he was. He was a green man, painted in this green copper, the metal of the sun that had come out of the earth, that they went and mined in the nearby forest. It's just bonkers when you start putting it all together. And so there's a chapter on the Green Man in there, but that's Druids again. It's Celts and Druids, so you're back in the same ballpark. Merlin must have known about all of this that had gone on before him, and he must also have been a worshipper of the metal of the sun, because it came to represent life and death, greenery. It was gold like the sun when it was melted. It was green like the leaves on the trees and the grass when it oxidized. I mean, Julius Caesar hated it, because when he got attacked, when he landed in 54 BC, he got pinned down on the beach. And it was really creepy, because none of his men had got off the boats. They were scared witless. So they all eventually got off to defend his standard. They're all stood on the beach. And then all of a sudden, all the trees and the bushes started to come alive, because the Celtic warriors were all painted blue-green. They were painted in green copper powder, which not only is that camouflage, but also if they get injured, it kills the bacteria in the wounds. So it must have been really creepy for Caesar, because you've got these guys charging in on chariots, throwing spears at him, and they're throwing spears and shooting arrows back, and they disappear off. And normally, 3 days later, people would be dying of blood poisoning. So there's the poor Romans dropping dead. Everyone that's been hit with a spear or an arrow, they're dropping dead. But 4 days, 5 days, 6 days, 6 weeks, 6 months later, the Celts are still coming back, and they're still alive, and they're still painted green, and they're not dying.
They're not dying.
Yeah, so that really freaked the Romans out. They couldn't cope with it.
They're not dying, darn it.
Yeah, they only actually ended up staying here for about 3 months. Then they signed loads of peace treaties with the Celts. Then, like I said, they cleared off for 100 years and didn't come back.
Right.
So, a lot to be said about.
What about this stuff with Druids and Celts, with dragon symbolism, part of like the dragon lines and ley lines and that sort of thing?
Oh wow! I actually think that goes back to older times. I think now you're in the prehistoric now, really.
Am I really? Damn, I'm good. I did a show on it once. I was like, oh, I'm going to go back and touch on that, because...
Well, you're in that time period of standing stones and ley lines and energy.
Right.
Now, when we think of dragons, we tend to think of the Chinese, but there's evidence of Celtic contact at the other end of the Silk Road with the Chinese.
England has lots of that sort of thing, doesn't it?
Well, yeah, we've got stuff over here that's come from China. We've got silk and metalwork and stuff like that. It's going way back to Roman. We've even in Roman times we've even got Chinese burials. There's a couple of skeletons came up recently in London that in the Roman level that turned out to be Chinese. So nothing unusual there. They were still here back then. But at the same time, there's Celts. There's these strange red-haired, tartan-wearing mummies that have turned up at the other end of the Silk Road over by the Great Wall of China. So when we think of dragons seem to be a worldwide thing. To me, it seems like a leftover memory of days when, dinosaurs had not completely died out. That seems to be where it's originating, with the energy and the power and the force. And eventually people remembered that, and then they started applying that to something that was invisible. Something that was mystical.
There's a town in Italy that claims to have, I think it's a rib of a dragon. It's in their church. The town, it was attacking people. Again, we're in medieval times, and two towns got together and just killed this thing. And
China has the same thing. It has tales of, I think the most recent are water dragons, which are dragons that come up out of pools and attack people, attack villages. But as you rightly say, most of them in the last historical era have died out or been killed off. We've not seen any for a long time. But it depends what you define as a dragon. It depends what your idea of a dragon is, because there's still a lot of things in the ocean that do resemble dragons. These giant eels and giant squid and giant fish. And when you actually look at them, things like the Loch Ness Monster, if that's a plesiosaur, then it could equally as well be referred to as a dragon, which is, in the oldest accounts, it's referred to as a dragon, because you've got a saint and you've got a dragon. It's about 400 and something AD. I can't remember what the saint is. It might be Columba. I could be wrong, though. St. Columbus. Anyway, he ends up getting rid of this dragon, which is, the Loch Ness Monster. He tells it to clear off and it goes. So that's the gist of that. So you've got that's going on as well. That's interesting. So I think the dragons, that rib that they've got might.
Well, it was knowledge to them, and they talked about this through the Celtic realms. Ley lines, because ley lines were called dragon lines as well.
Yes, absolutely. And of course, they have dragon lines in China. That's what they are, energy lines. They've been recorded there hundreds, if not thousands, of years. So it's not unusual. Whether the Druids would have necessarily referred to UK lines as dragon lines, I'm not sure. If you go back to their time, the Romans had dragons. This dragon iconography.
The Romans did.
The Scythians in particular. We had Scythians over here. They had standards. They had windsocks that were amazing. They could put burning coals in them so they breathed fire. And when they rode with them, they had reeds in the mouths so they screamed. So you can imagine, you've got, dozens of these Scythian banners coming down at you, and you've got smoke, fire, screaming, tails going. That's the inspiration for the Welsh flag. The wyvern that you see on the Welsh flag.
Yes. And then, of course, you have like Pendragon, Arthur Pendragon again.
And we're back on subject again,
because you're getting into even like the Anglo-Saxon word for dragon is.
Well, here's another kicker, okay? The Scythians.
It all comes down to wisdom. But it's funny because there are tales out there that talk about ancient dragons would stop and rest at Stonehenge. And it's just thinking, I laugh. I'm like, maybe that's why it's all decrepit. It's falling down.
Where I live in the northern half of Britain, it's not unusual to have dragon legends up here, because this is where the Scythians were.
So we're dealing with dragons, or we're just dealing with the idea of the knowledge of all of it. Right.
And they were also based at Chester. Ta-da! There's your link back to Camelot again. We've got the burials. We've got a tombstone with a guy riding a horse on it, and he's got one of these dragon standards. And it's from about 360 AD. So it's like, you may as well have written Scythians was here right across the walls, like Monty Python, like Romans Go Home, they literally signed the fact that they were here. So, some of the archaeology is obvious, it's kind of shoot, it's a duck stuff. So, we've got quite a few dragon legends up here, up in Cumbria and Lancashire and Yorkshire, and
it's huge in England. Like I said, I remember doing a whole segment on it. It's fascinating to me. But while we're on all of this, how does this tie? Just because we are coming up onto Easter weekend, of course, right? How does it all tie in? The Celts, and how did they celebrate? Like, I mean, they did, but they had their own celebration for this time of year that I think the church incorporated into the part of their celebrations.
Ustara has become Easter. It's part of the old Celtic calendar. Anyone that follows Wicca paganism, they'll know that that's what it is now.
Exactly.
I've got a couple of ideas. I think the Easter Bunny is a corruption of the hare. And I think certainly in our climate over here in the UK, the first hares, the first of these leaping bunny-shaped things, tend to emerge round about now-ish, April, May. You start to see them coming out. So that's where you get the Easter Bunny from. Needless to say, the Easter Bunny doesn't lay eggs. But the reason you get eggs is eggs represent life, resurrection, because it starts off pretty much like a stone, and then eventually it breaks open and out comes a chicken, and then you get repeat, because then the chicken lays another egg. Don't ask me which came first. I haven't got a clue.
Oh, yeah.
Probably the chicken, and it probably looked like a velociraptor, but that's another story.
Okay, see, right there. Yes. You're not wrong.
But yeah, so and that kind of the turning of the year, so you're going from death, which is winter, into spring, which is life, and then into summer. That is the same principle applied to an egg and the cycle of a chicken as you would apply via the green man to everything else. It's that same energy being applied, which means that, of course, you can apply the same thing to the idea of Jesus dying and then not being there and then coming back. And he comes back again. So it's the resurrection, which is why you find things like the green Christ. You get a green man's face looks like Jesus, but with foliage and that. You get that in churches, in later medieval churches, because that's what they've done. They've appropriated that idea of resurrection. But believe me, it's way older, way older than Christianity. As I said, it goes all the way back to Babylon and then back into prehistory. What they've done is they've appropriated a basic natural, functioning part of the planet we live on, which takes us then back into the 21st century, back to now. We look at the planet Earth now as Gaia, as planet Earth having its own life cycle, its own identity, its own spirit, its own force of life. It's pretty obvious if we go extinct, everything else is just going to carry on without us. This planet does not require us. And that now is the true representation of the green man. It's that force. It represents literally the soul of the planet. So if we're not environmental and we decide to go to war on the planet, and we all turn into Victorian industrialists and we decide to dominate, that's who you're deciding to fight against. You're going against Umbaba. You're going against the spirit, the same spirit that terrified those early prehistoric settlers of woodland. You're taking that on. That's what you're doing. You're going and fighting the green man at the end of the day. So that little tiny book, revealing the green man, it's got a massive story to tell, enormous story to tell. And it's very new. You'd be amazed how many people out there just put the green man up on the wall, in the back garden and go, oh, my plants will grow now. Isn't that wonderful? Look at the birds and all the rest of it. And I go into somebody's back garden and I see that and I think, why have you got a human sacrifice hanging on your wall? They used to chop people's heads off with that, that represents a really powerful force that you shouldn't really be messing about with, So it's both sides. There's light and dark, there's both sides to the green man. So definitely. Yeah.
It just keeps coming back to just keep going in circles. It's fascinating to me because there was no, how does one research Druids to the point that you have researched them? Because when you have there's no written history, you have to go based on verbal, oral history.
It's really a good question.
Because if the line dies out, or if the line ends up getting broken because there's a whole new, let's just say, Christianity comes in and changes it over time, there's very few that hang on to that oral history. We've seen it happen here in North America,
What you can do, what you can do, this is where the archaeology side of it comes in, is you can piece together a huge amount of evidence from the archaeological finds, because you've still got the physical remains of burials, offerings.
But you're going back 2,000 years. Like
it goes back even further.
Yeah.
Because I mean, Nebra Sky disc is a good example. This bronze disc they found in Germany that has a depiction of the sky on it, and when you actually decode it, you suddenly discover that all the little holes around the outside tell you where you are on planet Earth. They're all pinholes, and it gives you the coordinates when you see which areas are shaded in. So if you take the disc back to those coordinates, you can then look up at the night sky and it tells you where the Pleiades are. But that's 200 years before the Pleiades are depicted in ancient Egypt. So you're back to 1650 BC with this disc. But you can reconstruct the way that they thought and what they were looking for from the disc. Fast forward to the time of the Romans, and this Roman writer, I think it was Tacitus, just happens to mention, the Druids worshipped the rising of the Pleiades at the vernal equinox.
Yes.
So you're like, okay, there's your connection. The Romans have written it down, but 1,000 years, 2,000 years before them, you've also got it in the archaeological record, and that's what kind of happens.
You end up with all these crisscross the cultures for it. Then.
All these different references by different people. You have to piece them all together and then try and find out what they're talking about, and then add in the archaeology, piece all that together with the archaeology, and then you've got to look at the later material and say what survived. So as I said right at the beginning of the interview, you won't find instructions on how to build a church in the Bible. You'll find bits of information, but you won't find the instructions. So the next question is, well, where did they get the instructions from? What is it we're looking at? So you might have this little tiny church and it's built on an enormous mound, but the mound is surrounded with standing stones, and lo and behold, there are 2,000-year-old yew trees or 3,000-year-old yew trees growing around there. So you think, well, hang on a minute, you've got standing stones, takes you back to prehistory, you've got yew trees, 2,000 years old, it's built on a high point, that's back to what Gregory said in 640 AD, build on the same sites as, people before you. And then it's orientated, the church is orientated the same way as the standing stones. So it doesn't take a huge leap to see what's going on and then engineer it backwards, go backwards and see where this is coming from. So there's just enough. I mean, the Merlin section, I've got to say in the book, is the smallest of all of the sections, but it does pack a punch. There's a lot of stuff in there that you won't find anywhere else that's really difficult to get at. Hence, it took 40 odd years to pull it all together, and then 5 years to persuade a publisher to actually put it out there. I had 3 publishers, actually pretty big publishers, say to me, we can't put this out, it's more than our career's worth. If we print this, we'll get shut down.
Philip's a champion, and I think we sort of made mention of that at one show.
Well, Philip's amazing. It was obvious to me, anyone that can put out books about flying saucers landing on people's back gardens and little green men, he's not going to give a toss about the fact that, Tintagel's fake and Glastonbury's are fake and, all this, that, and he won't care. He'll just tell the truth. He'll tell it how it is, and that is exactly how it's worked out,
Right. But I mean, it's out there now, and you just touch on so many different things.
We've only just got
the whole
started.
Robin Hood connection is interesting to me also.
Well, he's a forester. At the end of the day, he's a medieval forester. So that's still on topic. It's still on topic. If anybody wants to go and get the book, I haven't got a copy to show, but it's The Life and Times of the Real Robin Hood, and the Robin Hood is spelled ROBYN-HOODE. So it's spelled differently.
Okay, so it's The Life and Times. I'm going to try to get a picture of The Life and Times of the Real
ROBYN-HOODE. Now, that we had to do that because everybody else has used the real name. So we had to go back to the medieval name so we could then put the book out, the way we wanted it. But it's a bit of a foobar because at the end of the day, it's hard to find. It's a difficult book to find. But it's out there. It's on Amazon. You can get it. You get all the books on Amazon for that matter. But he was a forester, so his symbol was the green man. And it's interesting. You're going to love this. He used to wear green. All his robes were green.
Yes, I'm just looking at pictures. So go ahead.
Well, he's wearing this green material. That green material was dyed using acetic acid, which is wee, and are you ready for this? Copper. So he's actually wearing a skin of copper. So you can the links are just so many. So the Lincoln green or the Cumbrian green, as he wore, the green.
Little hints, right?
Yeah, it's Green Man. It's back to the Green Man again.
Okay. I'm just looking for. Here it is. Oh, God, it took me a bit, but there it is. Okay, so can we see that there? Yes, we
that's
can.
The one. We can. Okay, we can see it. That's the one.
This is the one. It. Okay, I was just like, "Where are you?" To be able to bring it up because they don't always let you snag the.
Well, there's a little bit of trivia for you. We had a television program over here called Robyn of Sherwood many years ago, written by a really famous guy who went on to do all sorts of stuff. But in Robyn of Sherwood, there's an evil character that's like the evil Sheriff of Nottingham or whatever. The sword on the front cover of that book is one of the prop swords from that series. I just thought I'd put that on as an honor, as a nod to that. So
I love it.
It's very good.
And I love the little red crosses. It's just
well, this is where it gets really interesting because another topic creeps in there. Robyn later on in life ends up becoming a Templar. So that's quite there you go. So
I love it.
Yeah. So
I know a Templar cross when I see one.
Yeah. And there's links. This is it. There's wheels within wheels and there's like links within links. And the more that you read these different topics, it's like, you think, oh, what on earth could, King Arthur have to do with the Templars? And why were the Templars so interested? What was it about these legends that attracted them to, develop them in later times? So I touch on that in the book as well. I deal with that in the book. Yeah. And there's lots of different hints as well as to how Robin Hood gets sucked in on the same kind of level. And the key is that the Templars continue to believe the same things that you would find, for example, with the Druids. You'd find it in the times of King Arthur. You'll find it in the times of Robin Hood. And, of course, then you find it in the times of the Templars because they had no reason to change. So they all have this awareness of the existence of life and death and the Green Man. They keep the same festivals. They keep the same type of church. They all believe, for example, that the soul of a human being resides in the head. So that means that, the Templars have got this obsession with heads. They're said to have worshipped a head. There's carved heads everywhere, and they still had this tendency of keeping the heads of their enemies, which is exactly what the Celts did. They kept the heads of their enemies because they also believed that the soul resided in the head, as indeed did the Romans, as indeed did the Druids, and so on and so on and so on. It goes
back to knowledge as well, like they're the keepers of knowledge.
Yeah, I mean, people say there's this thing out there called the golden thread. Well, the true golden thread is mathematics. That's the true foundation, if you like, for everything, even magic. It all hides in mathematics. But there are other golden threads. So almost the Green Man, if you like, is the green and gold thread. It's a copper gold thread that runs through it all. And what that little book, Revealing Green Man, does is it just brings that forward very graphically. And I mean, it's been on the bestseller list for Amazon for ages, that one. So, I think it's everyone should have it. Every pagan, every witch, every archaeologist, every Romanist, everyone that's interested in Arthur or Robin Hood or Templars, because clearly the Templars were aware of the contents of that Green Man book. That's it. It's interesting because you talk to people who say, hey, guess what? I'm a member of an order of hereditary Templars. So one of my sort of trick questions is to say to them, okay, so what do you think of the Green Man? And they just give you this blank expression, or they roll out the usual thing where, it's, something we hang in our back garden. And I'm like, well, obviously they are not privy to the secrets of the Green Man, because it's a huge secret, really, really important secret. And it didn't necessarily die with the Templars because I think military orders through the ages, even after the Templars' military orders were aware of the part that copper had played historically in military campaigns, in making swords and shields and arrowheads. The whole Bronze Age is based on copper. So this fascination with that metal, I think, has run for years and years. And this was a little kicker that I just tacked on the end of the book, is that right up until very recent times, of course, bullets, the shells contain brass, which is made from copper. It's got the same elements. The element is still in it. Although the head of the bullet is usually made of lead, that can also be copper coated. But it's copper jacketed bullets, isn't it?
Yes,
it's still there. We're still killing each other by throwing copper at each other.
True.
It's not gone away. It's not. It's so that book as well. But it's relevant in ways that people just, if you kind of read it, it's like the light bulb. That you see in the cartoons where it goes ping. The bulb just keeps coming on all the time.
So pretty much that's for you. This is where it started.
Gosh, well, I suppose you could say it started with King Arthur, because that's going back to when
even further.
I was a teenager. That's the film was made in 1977. I was born in 1962, so not that old at the time. I think it was 14. I think when I was doing that, 15. I mean, we were don't knock it, because kids are quite creative. We actually won awards. It was only like an 8mm thing. It was about half an hour long we did with this thing. And it was silent, and we used all kinds of classical music, Halts the Planets and stuff with it. But it won awards. We won youth awards with it. It was amazing.
That's fantastic.
I mean, one of these days I'll get it converted. I'll get it digitized one day, because it's literally, it's on plastic. It's like Steven Spielberg material here. You know what I mean? But it got the process started. It got me going.
Do you still have people who, like today? I mean, we know there's festivals, to the Green Man, to the pagans, to the Celts. Is this still a way of life when you get into some of the outskirts? It would be for me if I lived there. Like I'd be just one of those people. I live in the past. You walk into my home, people say, well, what's the fascination with this? I say, I don't know. I feel good. There's something that makes me feel good around it. And I feel like that when I'm in the forest. I feel like that.
My house used to look like yours, my old house, because I moved house 2 years ago, just after lockdown. But my house was absolutely rammed full of exactly the same things that are in your house.
See, I love that.
And then I thought, you know what?
For a reason.
I was thinking I was going to have a tidy up. So, when I move house,
it's hard. Yeah.
I'll try and keep.
You have to take a Q-tip.
This will blow you away, because I came back to the family home. And when I came back because we've owned this place for 60, 70 years now, when I came back here, I'd completely forgotten that it's a haunted house. So I don't need any stuff here now. I'm living in a house full of ghosts and spirits where things disappear and reappear and stuff moves, and
I just left one.
Every day of the week, something's going on, You get builders running out of the property in terror because they've seen an old man with a flat hat and, that was there 1 minute and gone the next.
What do you expect? So everything's haunted in England.
So I've got to be very careful where I put my stuff now, because I'm not quite sure what I'm amplifying.
Gremlins.
Yeah.
I just left a house like that. There's workers over there now finishing up a couple of things, and they're getting the lights turned out on them. They're basically, they come out, their things are missing.
Well, this is the real kicker for this one, because this one is actually it stands on a massive Roman and Saxon burial ground. So I know for a fact that the Romans are actually buried in urns in my back garden. They're out there. My dad, before he passed away, saw them. He saw them in the back garden. So, I'm surrounded by it here. I can't escape it. So it's hardly surprising, really, that things.
And you, as an archaeologist, never thought to go and maybe consider.
When I was a teenager, I went and had a poke around out there. I didn't really find anything.
Over that.
But then I've done digs in the surrounding area. I've done one sort of down the road and one just across the river and one sort of up in Appleton here, which is the hill behind us. So, I've done digs. I've done it all around the area. But I've not really done anything in the back garden. I must get around to doing that.
I know, it's like right there. I know.
Memo to me, get out there and dig when the weather dries up,
Yeah,
So I think that's coming. What was the original question? I'm sure
cultures. Are there still people living this lifestyle?
Yeah.
Well, as much as you can consider.
I suppose, well, clearly I'm living it because I'm living here. I'm living in the middle of it all, and it's happening on a daily basis. But if you came over here, I think you would find people of a like mind living in Wales, because you've got Snowdonia, you've got the whole Welsh landscape. It's very remote, but at the same time, boys, it's spiritual. That's one heck of a part of the country. Cornwall, parts of Ireland and parts of Scotland, and there's one or two dotted around in Cumbria. Basically, the further north you go, the more people you find that are really switched on, they're turned on to this material. In this country, the further south you go, the more it tends to become materialistic, because you're heading into the richer parts of the country, and ultimately you finish up with the imposter, which is London. The former capital of Britain was Chester. That's where the capital was for thousands of years. It's Viking, for goodness sake. The Vikings got London going. So that's where sort of the center of materialism and that kind of power is now. But yes, if you went out to the countryside areas, you'd still find a lot of people are aware, very aware of the British history that is behind them. Yeah, they really are.
Right. It's nice to see that people are still embracing it. I find it's such an old culture. I know here a lot of our indigenous, in North America, I mean, they still embrace it. They've never really lost it. And people like to think that we're fairly new, but we've had cultures here that have gone back thousands of years.
Well, it made me smile a bit when they started doing, I think it was one of the salt lakes they were excavating, and they got a trail of human footprints. So they thought, I'll tell you what we'll do. We'll get the organic material out of these footprints and we'll date it, the next layer up. I think they got either 26 or 27,000 BC. And the people that left the footprints, it would appear, crossed when the Bering Sea was frozen. So they came across when America was joined to everything else. So that is the beginning of the beginning of the beginning, if you know what I mean. It's back when, you started woolly rhinoceroses, woolly mammoths, back then. And coming right forward, I mean, if you come all the way up to modern day, I'm leaning towards the kind of everybody went everywhere and did everything theory. If you had a boat and you could sail, you could go anywhere. So programs like Ancient Aliens and things like that, where they're looking at all these things that are tied up. I'm not sure it's aliens. I'm sure that it's people talking to people. It's about exchange of information. Yes, there might have been a super race. There might have been a super city like Atlantis that went down and everything got scattered. That's believable.
But let's face it, look at how much is under the water right now that we don't know. Lost continents. We found 2 extra continents.
Yeah, there's so much stuff now. We've got it over here in the UK, where the English Channel used to be dry land, and the North Sea, parts of the North Sea used to be dry land, and you're finding all sorts of prehistoric stuff there.
But what's your take then on out of place artifacts? Because
parts. I love parts.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, I think a lot of them are exactly what they appear to be. They're leftovers. They're the little tiny bits of archaeology, the windows to the past, that are from superior civilizations. A lot of scientists say we're not discovering stuff, we're rediscovering stuff. And I think a lot of those, technologies in the past, everything, all sorts of weird stuff like gold coming out of, gold jewelry coming out of coal measures, iron turns up where it's not supposed to be. There's an aluminium pot, I think, an aluminium vase that came out of something that was 20,000 BC. And you've got all these
200, 300 million years old.
Well, that's
Like we're not the first kick at the can on the planet. Let's face it. Like it's interesting to see some of these things mines that were used to mine uranium, and you see these big tubes coming from them and a wheel that's petrified right into the stone, and you can clearly see it's a wheel.
They've got iron water pipes, I think, now in a lake bed in China. I think they're 110,000 BC. So, what on earth is going on? Just because we don't know where to look to find these things, we don't have a fossil for that, so we're not sure where people were and what people were doing. It doesn't mean that there weren't people there.
Right. I agree. And it's fascinating to me how, mind you, maybe not so much now, but I'll tell you a quick story of a friend of mine who's been on the show a few times, is a collector of many unbelievable things. You'd love this guy with some of the artifacts he has. Anyway, a friend of his had contacted him, I guess back in the 70s. He was diving a site off the UK that he had discovered. And the story goes, and this is on the show, you guys, people can go back and check it out. The story goes, the friend, back then you had to go through, the military to get satellite images of an area, which is a big faux pas if you don't want anybody to know about it, because now the military knows about it. And he had brought up a lot of interesting pieces, and one of those pieces was very similar to the Baghdad battery that once surfaced and went missing. Oh yeah, we've got photos of it and everything. Yeah, they were sent to me for the show. And this friend had been visited, luckily he separated a lot of the stuff that he found. He'd been visited by Men in Black type characters, as Olly said. They confiscated some of this stuff, and thankfully whatever was left at another location went to my friend, who it's all tucked away nice, including said Baghdad battery. And that's off the coast of England, and he was told never again.
Don't do that again.
To dive there. No. Now we're talking 70s, maybe 80s, 90s. So they may not be as anal about it now because sites are surfacing everywhere. But
I have 100 stories of archaeological sites where they've found something which starts then to be recorded. So it's either photographed or it's going into the, the dig log for that day report, and it never makes it to the report. And there's 100 stories of that happening where things vanish. Now, I've got to say, I'm going to be generous here and say that probably 60-70% of that is either valuable stuff that they don't want you to know that they've got because of its value, material value, or it could be, a small tiny percentage of that could be theft. It could be stuff disappearing and then just getting blotted out. But there's a hefty wedge of it, 30, 40, 50% of it is stuff that they don't want recorded as being found at all for whatever reason. So it could be political, it could be they want to develop the site, it could be they don't want the development stopped, so they make things vanish and disappear, or it's not in the right place at the right time. It's the wrong thing. It happens. I personally, I can confidently say on my deathbed that I have never done that, and I have no intention of ever doing that. I don't make things disappear. The archaeology unit we ran for 12 years was pretty scary because whatever we found, we published. It went out there, and we filmed everything we did. It was all videoed. So we did a good job of recording stuff, but stuff disappears. It does vanish.
That to me is, that to me is, this dive wasn't any sort of archaeological thing. I think he's a diver. He came across it, pulled up a few things, put them away. I think back then, I don't know if it was such, if it was as regulated as it ended up being to more
1970s, 80s, 90s. Diving was a different thing back then. Diving has only become regulated. It's only become part of archaeology really since about the late 80s, early 90s. So, and even then it was confused. Nobody really knew what to do. Nobody knew how to record stuff.
It's a difficult task.
In fact, the guy over here that's just about to become king, Charles,
yes.
When Queenie was alive, Charles was responsible. His ownership, land ownership, extended to the coast. So he looked after the coast and 3 miles out in every direction. So if you dove and you stole something off the seabed, you were stealing it from the crown. But it was Charles, King Charles, as he is now, Prince Charles. It was his land.
Well, didn't he major in archaeology or something too?
Like he's pretty good with stuff like that. But
so at least he's very, like minded
but
too.
we have these weird regulations, that you kind of pick up on as an archaeologist. Like one of the famous ones that we know, but most people don't know, is if a meteorite strike comes down and hits mainland Britain, then the meteorite, no matter what it is, it belongs to the crown. You're supposed to hand that over. It used to be to the Queen. You gave it to the Queen. So the Queen owned all the meteorites that fell in Britain. Most people actually over here just pick them up and keep them because they don't know what to do with them.
Right.
But you're supposed to hand them in.
There's lots of value in those things too.
Well, it's not just the value. It's imagine the value to science.
Oh,
sure. and the metals, the strange metals, and the alien composition, and which planet did it come off? Where did it come from in space, and and all this, that, and the other. So you're supposed to give them in mainly for analysis, but
one or two of them come to North America, they'll tell you where they are and go just grab them. I mean, again, my said friend sent me a piece of meteorite from Russia.
Well, I've got
analyzed.
I think I've got 3 or 4, but don't tell anyone.
Right? And being in England and all. No, he had some samples sent for analysis, and it tells you how old everything is and what elements were found in there, and maybe elements that may be unknown. And so it came with this little card, and I'm just like, this is fascinating. They took the time to do this, and it goes, oh yeah, there's some parts of the world, like go to Russia, places like that.
I've got quite a large one, a sort of oval one that must have hit the atmosphere and got flattened. And as it's come in, some of the little bits of metal in there have ended up sticking out. This kind of stand out.
Wow.
And a friend of mine, when I first found it, he said, "How do you know it's a meteorite?" I said, "Oh, what can we do to test this?" So I came home and I got a piece of scrap glass out of the greenhouse, and I got this meteorite, and I ran the meteorite down the middle of this glass, and it just went, and the glass just went, boom, it just fell in half.
Right. Wow.
So, and this is a tiny little bead of metal that's sticking out from it.
Right.
So it's hard enough to slice a piece of plate glass in half.
That's crazy. Crazy.
Clearly that's a meteorite, otherwise it would have just, the bits would have just fell off it.
Well, I know I wear moldavite, which is also another form of.
Oh, that's meteorite strike glass. So that has elements. Elements of meteorite in it. Yeah.
Yeah. Often reproduced. People don't just go buy what you see.
Yeah, be very careful. Moldavite's quite
scarce.
Everything. Yeah, it's quite scarce now.
Yeah,
I might have quite a big piece knocking around somewhere. I've got tektites as well, which are these bits of glass that come whizzing in from space.
Right.
I've got all sorts of bits. I'd love a piece of desert glass, but they don't let you have that anymore. They've stopped exporting that. Yeah, you can't have that. Saharan desert glass. People were literally going there, clearing the desert of it. So the authorities just went, no, stop. There's not going to be any left at all. So whatever's out there that's it now. Whatever people have got, that's it.
Wow. I like the moldavite. I think it's just from a mediumship standpoint, it's a very powerful little thingy as well, and it does. It's very, very interesting how it works with
anything that's extraterrestrial is gonna pack a bit of punch.
Yes,
and it does.
It does.
Definitely. Yeah.
And
that's what I mean. These meteorites I've got, they all come from different places. A couple from this country, a couple from Africa, some are from the United States. They're all over the place.
So it didn't come from England. Just putting it out there.
Well, when you pick them up, when you pick them up, they all feel the same.
Yeah, right. Exactly. No, it didn't.
Yeah, I'm going to have a knock on the door now from the Men in Black.
Exactly. Did not come from England. That's why I said it.
About those 2 British ones you mentioned.
Yeah. What British ones?
Yeah, what British ones? You don't mean the one that cuts glass in half, do you?
Oh, that one. Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Great. I love it. Well, so you spoke of this new book you have coming up.
Well, there's a nice link there, because when we're talking about extraterrestrial material, I have a piece of a crashed UFO as well. And that's what the new book's about, because it's actually new old. What Philip wants me to do, and it's only fair because, you know, he's a UFO publisher. He publishes UFO books. So he wants me to do a book on UFOs. So that makes sense. So I'm like, well, he's done one on, you know, crystal skulls. He's done another one on King Arthur. It's about time we did one on a UFO. So back in 2008, I did a documentary called Europe's Roswell, and it was based on a UFO crash that happened in 1983 in Wales, a place called Llanillar, a village just outside Aberystwyth. And what Philip said is, he said, has it dawned on you that in 2023, it's 40 years since the original crash? So why don't you convert the DVD, which nobody buys anymore because it's a DVD, and there weren't that many of them. He said, why don't you convert that and all the information with it into a publishable book? So that is the plan. The release date is August, and it's still going to be Europe's Roswell because it has to follow on from the DVD. But the zip line is 40 years since impact. So that's coming. We're actually quite a long way down the line with it.
I like it.
Well, we're at the stage where we've got sort of a draft version of it, and we're just thinking, is there anything else? You know, do we need to put anything else in it? Because I don't want it to go out with anything missing. So we're just holding back a bit to see if anything else turns up. But the kicker with this one is it actually shows you pieces of the crash debris, because there are 6 pieces, and one of them's pretty big. You've got 6 pieces that were recovered from this crash. So they are actually shown in great detail. You get nice big pictures of them and things in this book. So it's almost the reverse of a normal book on UFOs. Because what you usually get is well, you know, I saw a light. Or I heard a noise. Or, you know, this disc came down and it hovered and then it vanished, you know, and that's what you normally get. But in the book, we're starting off at the end. We're starting off with pieces of this thing that actually exist. And then we're trying to find out where the hell they come from. So we're going backwards, you know. It goes in reverse.
I'm amazed you still have it.
Oh, yeah.
It's like a little trove someplace of just little treasures. That is really fascinating to me.
Well, the guy that actually recovered the debris doesn't keep the debris anywhere near himself or near his property or anything like that. It's away, it's locked up, and the tiny piece I've got is about the size of my little fingernail.
But the fact that you still were able, or he was still able to get a hold of this, because let's face it, since the Roswell days or the Rendlesham days, you get, you know, military comes in, they clean the place out.
And that's exactly what they did. Basically what happened, he knew the farmer on whose land it crashed. And the farmer basically phoned him up and said, you'd better come up here because I've got 4 fields covered in debris. What am I going to do? But he also, the farmer, phoned the local Air Force base and said, is this one of yours? So, of course, the next minute, you know, the place is swarming with a cleanup team, and they just cleaned it. So by the time my mate got there, by the time the fellow with the crash recovery team got there, the farmer's like, well, you're a bit late, you know, it's all gone. Anyway, my mate's a bit wiser than that, and he thought, okay, you can see where this thing, wherever it was, hit the trees. So I bet they've not cleared the forest. So he piles in the forest with the rest of the recovery team, and that's where he got these 6 pieces from. But then the week after that, the Forestry Commission cleared the forest, so that's gone. And then a couple of weeks after that, he gets the knock on the door, the boom, 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 you know, and it's the men in black, couple of guys, black suits, dark glasses, you know, passes, cars with no number plates, the whole 9 yards. Can we have our bits of metal back? At which point my mate says, well, actually, you're a bit late, because what I've done is I've broken one of these things up and I've given key rings out to loads of people who are in the media. And if you come back knocking on my door again, I'll tell them to release the key rings to the press. So these guys were like, oh, we're not going to get all that back, are we? So they just drove off, and I got one of the key rings.
Oh, good for you.
Yeah.
But they
So
tried. That's interesting. How did they even know he had them?
Well, yeah, this is the thing, isn't it?
Right? They watch everything. It goes to show you.
Yeah, and they ended up turning up on his doorstep as well, so they clearly knew where he lived. They found out that they'd done the research and that,
And
that was back in the 1980s. That was 1983. So
well,
how far has
in
it
and
come
around the
since then?
Rendlesham time, wasn't it?
Yeah, and also there was the Bowie Mountain incident, and there's quite a lot of other famous incidents here in this country, and they were all around that early 80s time period. In fact, in the book, I had a sighting in the early 80s as well, so I put that in. So a lot of the material that got me interested in UFOs, even though I was only a trainee archaeologist, then I was still involved in other things, and that story's in there as well. So that's coming in August. That's the next one. I'm
surprised you haven't found any like extraterrestrial things in all of your, or have you? In all of your digging, because let's face it, they come back to ancient times, right? Like,
well, the original name of the game with the crash was the reason my mate contacted me is he said we're going to go and dig it up. Let's get in these fields and dig and see what we can find. But it was dead obvious really, really quickly that these things were clear. There was nothing there. They'd done an amazing job on it. You'd be down to, like Roswell, where they were with a sieve pulling out little tiny beads of metal. You'd be on that level to find anything. You'd be lucky to find anything then. And it was a huge area. You're talking about acres and acres of land.
Of debris,
that was all over. So it's much bigger than Roswell. So I couldn't deal with that as an archaeologist. But then obviously as an archaeologist, I found meteorites. I found other bits of stuff that are not quite as they should be. I can think of one prehistoric site that we were digging on, and the way they'd arranged the prehistory was very strange. So we ended up coming away wondering if it was a Victorian folly that someone had built, or whether it was a new type of site that we hadn't seen before, built in a different way. So we had lots of bits and bobs like that. Funnily enough, on that particular dig, middle of the night, I had somebody come tearing into my tent with a torch going, "You're not going to believe this, I've just been buzzed by a UFO." So we had lots of things like that going on, because we're out in the open, we're camping, in the open air. And they'd had this light had come whizzing over the top of them on this hillside where we were doing this dig. So lots of bits of things like that happen, amazing, 12 years. I mean, we've done all sorts. We've dug up Roman stuff where it shouldn't be. We found a Celtic well that was where it wasn't supposed to be. We've had this weird prehistoric site where it wasn't supposed to be, and all things like that. Loads of stuff we've dug up.
Lots of history, lots of mysteries. I mean, I think,
and lots of discoveries.
Yeah, exactly. UK's full of them. I mean, it's just. Lots of history, lots.
I mean, again, back to it's a slight advert, but it's also true, and that is I try and get as much as I can into the books. My generation now is getting older. None of us are going to last forever, and I don't want to disappear in 20 years' time, 25, 30 years' time, whatever, and not have left behind the stuff that I've discovered in my time. Because there's so many, I mean, in archaeology, there's archaeologists dropping dead left, right, and centre, and they leave an enormous amount of stuff unfinished. There's so much stuff that's out there. That's the worst part of it, actually, because most of the discoveries and the alternative discoveries and the U parts and all these weird things, all the rest of it, they get lost when people die. Hence Camelot, the chief archaeologist for Chester decides he's going to offload it all on me because he's older than me. He's 10, 15, 20 years older than me, and he can't say anything because he'll lose his job,
but I think it's fantastic that he said to you, look, because I mean that's a big trust thing.
Oh, huge, enormous. I'd love to, I mean, this is me making an advert out of this again, but I'd love somebody to come along, be it Prometheus with Ancient Aliens or whoever, some production company to come along and go, let's do Arthur. I mean, I've got enough material to do 2 or 3, maybe 4 1-hour programs, because when that happens, people like the archaeologist from Chester, he can go on record. He can go on camera and say, well, actually, it is Camelot, and these are the reasons why, and he can come out.
Why can't he come out now in this day and age? It would be such an accepted thing. There's just so many. There's so many people. There's so many documentaries, and this is where it is, or this is where it is, and you're looking at it.
Basically, the upshot is they won't let him retire because he's an expert and he knows so much. They just keep coming back to him.
But what does it matter if they know where Camelot is? I guess what I'm saying.
It sort of opens an enormous can of worms because if you get the book and you have a read on the section on Camelot,
right,
there's a lot of bits in there that will shake the tree, shall we say.
Don't want to be shaking no trees now. Is that what you're saying? I'm a tree shaker, Mark.
Just little bits of stuff like, for example, the first Pope recorded in the Pope list after Peter and Paul is a guy called Linus or Linus, Pope Linus.
Right.
His mum, I think it's his mum, or is it his wife? No, I think it's his mum. I think it's his mum. His mum is British. She's given us a blue-painted Britain. So that means half of the first Pope came from this country. He's British. Now, where have you read that in history books? I actually got it from Catholic records. I got it from the Pope list. It's in there. If you actually do the research and go back and look at the papal lineage, you'll find that she's in there. But that's just, that's mad. The first place in the world that the insult Christians was used against this newly emerging religion is thought to be Britain, potentially up north. The first Christian martyrs, Aaron and Julius, and St. Alban, that whole story is thought to take place in the amphitheatre at Chester. The true capital of Britain for thousands of years is Chester. Right. Nothing to do with London. You can see where this is going. I mean, there's people out there now who are into politics who are chewing the knuckles off. You know what I mean?
Right.
And the more these things start to add up, the first church to be built anywhere in the world, which was circular, built by Joseph of Arimathea, was built just down the road, possibly at Llangollen, which is just outside Chester on the River Dee.
Right.
And then it gets really crazy. If you push it to its logical conclusion, you've got, Rome itself, Rome is collapsing. The Roman Empire is collapsing.
It is.
And they end up with Rome, the city of Rome, in the middle.
Yeah.
And they end up with the Eastern Roman Empire and the Western Roman Empire.
Yes.
So you look at the capital of the Eastern Roman Empire and it's Constantinople, it's Istanbul.
Yeah. Right.
So, nobody's going to argue with that.
Right.
So you think, okay, where's the same place? Let's look for the same equivalent place.
Right.
Using Rome as the starting point. Right. So you set off going the other way, and guess where you end up? Yeah, Chester.
Wow.
And it's almost the same distance by road in Roman miles from the centre of Rome to Constantinople as it is to the centre of Chester. They're the same distance apart.
That's really interesting.
Oh, yeah. And then it doesn't stop there. It goes on and on. So, there's material there that people might find difficult. But like I said, I've been a bit naughty in that I've been very matter of fact. I've been really, there's no opinion in there. It's like, if that is how far apart they are, then go and have a look on Google Earth and check it. There it is. You can't argue with that,
No.
London was just some deserted, poxy Roman campaign fort in the middle of nowhere when Chester was the biggest Roman fortress ever built.
Right. Which says something right there.
Yeah, there's no argument. And it's in the beginning, it's Chester's at the centre of the three of the four main military zones in Britain. It's also central to England, Cornwall, Wales, Ireland, Scotland. It's in the middle.
Right.
So that's where you'd expect the Romans to put it.
Well, it's funny enough when you make mention of that and the Romans, because for the south of France, it would be like the whole Rennes-le-Château and the Languedoc area, having this pentacle sort of thing was something going on in this area.
Oh, if you really want to go down that route, here's a belting one for you. Okay, The only river,
Yes.
the only river in the world, apart from another one I'm going to tell you about, but the only river in the world dedicated to Ct.Min.AP, who is a Celtic druidic goddess, is the River Seine in northern France.
Wow.
And they've got the Druid shrine. They've excavated the Druid shrine, complete with the offerings still in it, at the source of that river, the River Ct.Min.AP. Except the second river, Ct.Min.AP, is the River Mersey that runs directly across the top of King Arthur's lands. Okay, it's up here, and it's in Sir Gawain and the Green Knight, and it runs in exactly the same direction. It's almost exactly the same shape, and it terminates up at the moors on Buxton, where there's a druidic shrine.
Which makes sense if his mother came from the northern
So,
France.
yeah, exactly. So all they've done is taken everything that's in France and moved it up here, or they've taken everything that's up here and moved it down into France.
Well, the reason I mentioned Rennes was because it was a big Roman settlement there.
Yeah, but you've got thousands of years of this going on.
Yes.
The Druids did it, the prehistoric people did it, the Celts did it, the Romans did it. Yeah, everybody did it. These two places are linked.
Yeah. Well, you take it a step further, you know, people, the believers who believe that Jesus did not actually die on the cross, ended up coming in through, you know, France at some point with, you know, his uncle and Mary Magdalene, or the three Marys, all of them, all different times. But it's believed that they even went up into England and Ireland, because he went everywhere, you know, India, you know, everywhere, including learning about the Celts and pagans and Druidism and this.
Now you're on chapter 2 of the Polychronicon. You've gone from Merlin. You've gone from Merlin. You've gone to Joseph. You're on Joseph of Arimathea now.
And I haven't even read the book.
I just knew you were going to go there, you know, because things tend to flow. You said right at the beginning we hadn't got a clue where this was going to go.
We're always all over the place, but it always so well. Up back around.
Well, the answer to what you just said is yes, of course. They left, you know, Palestine. They left the Holy Land. They sailed into the Med to try and get away from the Romans because, you know, as I said at the beginning, Joseph was persecuted. Christians were persecuted. They didn't want to stick around, you know, for Trajan and Vespasian to go down there and batter the living daylights out of them. So they ran away. They fled.
Right.
Joseph just went as far as he possibly could. He didn't stop till he fell off the end of the Roman world. And when you fall off the end of the Roman world, you end up in Britain.
Right.
But the interesting thing is, in the original stories, it's not called Weary All Hill, which is this thing down at Glastonbury. It's referred to as Wirral Hill. And the Wirral is up here, right next to Chester, just north of the lands of Arthur.
Right.
And it's still here. It's still called the Wirral. So, and the whole story is there in the landscape. You can see it. It's still there. And in the local legends, you know, it's still there. Hence me saying earlier on that the first church is at Llangollen on the Dee, which is not far from Chester. You know, it's all happening. It's all taking place up here in the northern part of Britain. I'm not sure Jesus survived, and you've also got to be very careful because Jesus was a really common name. It's like being called Bob or John or Jim. You know, there's tons of them. So if you get a Jesus turning up where he's not supposed to be, the first reaction, my first reaction is, well, yeah, fine, it might be Jesus and it might be a Christian, but it might not be the guy that was doing what he was doing back in Palestine. It might be a different guy. But Jesus' family also went everywhere, and some of them, especially James, got mistaken for Jesus, you know, all the time. So you've really got to be careful. And the same thing's true of the Madonnas as well when you get the Madonnas in France.
Right.
Because there are at least 3, possibly 4 Marys on the ship with Joseph, because you've got Mary, the mother of Jesus, you've got Mary, the Magdalene, you've got Mary, the Ethiopian handmaiden, and then I think with Cleopatra's wife is also sometimes referred to as Mary. So the Black Madonnas, in my mind, the Black Madonnas could be the Ethiopian handmaiden. You know, they drop her off in southern France, and they're all like, "Oh, biblical, you know, oh, but she's dark, but her name's Mary." You know, so. It might just be that simple. It could just be that simple because there's a lot of evidence that certainly we're not sure about the Magdalene. The jury's out on that one. But Mary, the actual Mary, the mother of Jesus, there is evidence in the Welsh Arthurian records that she could potentially be buried below the coffin of Joseph of Arimathea. And there's evidence that Joseph of Arimathea is buried here in North Wales. So she's either buried here or she's buried in Ephesus. Now, Ephesus have taken the claim, but their claim is that, well, we've got the house. This is where Mary's house is. So clearly she'd be buried somewhere in this area. But I don't follow that. That doesn't make sense to me, because the Vatican records that were discovered in the 400s, 400 and whatever AD, by one of the Roman Catholic people, they discovered the records. She's recorded as coming here with Joseph. So it's, what do you believe? Do you believe the archaeological evidence that that's where her house was, or do you believe the written records that she came here as part of Joseph's entourage?
That's a tough one.
It's
a tough one. You know,
it's even tougher because if somebody wants to make a documentary about King Arthur, I've got a pretty good idea where they're buried. Okay, so if somebody wants to stomp up the money for the geophys, we'll go and have a look.
Right. It's a whole other book, man.
I'm a real tease, aren't I?
I know. It's just why it's hard to stay on one topic when we start talking.
Well, in all reality, we haven't really changed topic.
No.
Because the Green Man, Robin Hood, King Arthur, the Templars, they're all on the same page.
Got it all.
I know. They are all on the same page.
And
literally.
It brings us right to the end of the show. It's just full circle. And oh my gosh. Okay. Well, this is a part of the show where you basically just promote yourself. How can people find you?
Okay, I'm really simple to find. If you want to come and find me personally, the best thing to do is just go on Facebook. You know, send me messages. I'll friend you. You could also, if you really want to, get my attention, send me a message on Messenger as well, because that helps me to establish that you're not Fifi Trixabel with a unicorn that's been cloned by some guy in North Africa. I'll be able to identify you. So if you send me a friend request and a message on Messenger, no problem at all. And I'm pretty distinctive. You know what I look like. You'll find me no trouble. And the other side of it is, if you want to get hold of any of the things I produced, you might even get the DVDs actually secondhand on Amazon. You might find a bit of that sort of thing out there. But Amazon, go to Amazon. All the books. Go to Amazon, and even the first local history books that I produced for the north of England back in the 1990s that got me the TV series, apparently they are still available. You can still get them. So go to the publisher, Churnet Valley Books, and order them through Amazon. From there, I mean, I don't know, the first book I ever wrote was on collector's edition at 95 quid. Forget that. You can buy it for like 8 quid from the publisher. Go and find the originals, but they're all out there. There's eventually, by August, there'll be 9 of them. You'll be able to get all 9 books, and there's at least, I worked this out, probably at least 3 DVDs out there somewhere as well. So go search, go look for me.
Go find Mark everywhere, because he's everywhere.
I'm out there.
Thank you so much for joining me again. It's just always so nice. I love the whole, everywhere we go, but it's just, people love it too, because I hear about it afterwards. So,
brilliant.
But we're going to be having you on again. I don't even have my list in front of me. I think it's in June. I think it's June.
Yeah.
June 21st.
Yeah, I think we're doing this summer.
Right? Yeah, we're going to be talking about Robin Hood.
Yeah, we can.
We're going to be working some stuff out, let me tell you, because we cover a lot of ground.
Let's kind of do a continuity. Let's pick up where we left off. Let's finish Arthur and do Robin Hood, because both of those books are polychronicons. They're both chronological history.
I love it. That's what we're going to do. We're just going to take the bits of the book and keep going.
Yeah, let's just do the rest.
Okay.
Yeah, we'll do the rest.
We'll do it. Okay. Well, thank you again, and I hope you have a terrific weekend. Thank you
Fabulous.
for joining me.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having me.
Always. Okay. Thank you. Good night.
Good night.
Well, we've come to the end of another fantastic segment on the Outer Realm. Again, guys, it's a pre-record. So, I hope you enjoy it. Feel free to post questions, and we will do our best to get back to you. Next week, Philip Kinsella is on the Wednesday evening. We're going to be talking about, I believe he's got a new book out, and maybe we'll even talk about some reptilian stuff in there. which is kind of creepy. Kevin Jeffers joins us on the 13th, and he's a soul traveler, and he'll be speaking about his book, I think it's called The Pattern. So it sounds really, really amazing. So watch for all the promo to come up and give you guys a bit more insight on all of that. But have a good Easter weekend, because it is Easter this weekend. So if you're traveling, be safe, and we'll see you next week.